آزادی بیان.
言论自由
Free speech.
Welcome everybody to this free speech debate event on Facebook privacy and you. We're delighted to have Lord Allen, Richard Allen, who after a distinguished political career as a Liberal Democrat specializing in matters of information and education, is Director of Public Policy for Facebook in Europe, and our own Professor Victor Mayer-Schonberger, who is Professor of Internet Governance and Regulation at the Oxford Internet Institute and author, most relevantly, of this book, Delete, the Virtue of Forgetting in the Digital Age. The subject is obviously of enormous interest to everyone who is on Facebook or on any other social network, but also particularly at the moment because of various initiatives, notably the new EU data protection draft directive and the whole debate about the right to be forgotten. Richard will talk for 20-25 minutes.
Yes.
Victor will respond, and then there'll be plenty of time for discussion. Richard.
Thanks very much, and thank you for coming this evening. I wanted to really try and set out the context that I think is changing the way that we have to grapple with issues around the sharing of personal data, and then think about some of the tools that we have in place to help us to manage what is essentially an explosion of personal data. You could call it like ambient personal data that is now flowing around us. And I think the two technologies, to set the context, the technologies that fundamentally change the context are, most importantly, the digital capture devices, which allow us to capture images or to produce text in a reproducible digital format, combined with connectivity to what is now pretty much ubiquitous internet, a network that connects now, I think, over 2 billion people. So the ability to instantly capture some form of data, which will frequently include personal data. It's not necessarily personal data, but frequently it does include personal data, and the ability to distribute that pretty much no cost to this huge audience, or what's set the context. So I think that does change things quite fundamentally. It's not an absolute change. People always could distribute content. So William Hogarth could produce the Rake's Progress, and you could, 300 years ago, have hired an artist to draw a picture of your friend getting drunk in the pub, and having drawn that picture of your friend, you could have reproduced it at considerable cost and distributed it to as many people as wanted to take it. So the principle is not different, that content can be captured in an individual and then shared widely. What's fundamentally different, I think, is the amount of friction that there now is in that process. So whereas historically it was a very high friction process, there were huge barriers to entry. You needed to hire the artist, print the material, and get it out to a distribution network. What we've done in the technology sector essentially is invest huge effort in removing those barriers and removing that friction so the stuff can get out as fast as possible. And in most cases, that's exactly what people want to happen. And I think in most cases, we will recognize that reducing that friction is exactly what we want to take place. So if you think about what's taking place in Syria today, it is the ability in a friction-free way now to capture some content, to get it up onto sites like YouTube, and then to seed that through Twitter and Facebook, that allows people to do the equivalent of the 18th century pamphleteer, but at lightning speed and very effectively in terms of trying to get that message through. So technologies that we have are designed, I say now, to remove the friction to getting a message out from a personal digital capture device. The question when we come to more personal data then is frequently not are we going to get the information out at all, but how do we get the right information to the right audience, and how do we stop the information getting to the wrong audience? So the tools are all geared up and optimized in terms of the internet and capture devices to get stuff out as quickly as possible, as broadly as possible. I think where social networks come in is precisely to try and answer that conundrum, to say that we actually need something that's between the maximal audience and the audience of no one, which is a controlled audience. And that decision about who the right people are and who the wrong people are is a personal decision that every single individual needs to take. There's nobody who can make that decision for you. The simplest answer to that first question, which is how do you get the information to the right people, is to share with everyone. If you share everything with everyone, then hopefully you maximize the number of opportunities for people who want to see that information to see it and get hold of it. The simplest answer to the second question, how do you make sure it doesn't get to the wrong people, is to share it with no one. If I keep the photo on my digital capture device, then the only people who get to see it are the ones I can sit in front of and I can show it to personally, or maybe I can print some copies off and send them through the post in the old-fashioned way. It's a very high-friction method of doing it, but that's the way that I can maximize the chance that it's not going to get to the wrong people, because I physically keep control of the information as far as I can and try and prevent digital copies from circulating on their own. So there's very little risk if there's no access of getting to the wrong people, but also much reduced chance of it getting to the right people, the people I want to see it. So neither of those solutions, I think, is entirely satisfactory for the way that most of us now want to distribute information. It's not efficient for me to walk around and show the photo. It's not efficient for me to take a printed copy and send it to every one of my relatives. It's much more efficient for me to use an online distribution channel. So social networks are trying to get into that space, which is between the wholly private and the wholly public, between what we had before. We had blogs. I had my blog, which I don't often update anymore, but if you search for me, actually if you search for me online, you found a Wikipedia page, you found a blog, and you found my Facebook page. The blog was publishing information to the world. I was sticking it out there to the whole world. The social network has come along and given me a space where I can now publish to a more restricted audience. And social networks themselves have different characteristics. So some of them tend towards the more public end. Something like Twitter clearly tends to the more public end of that. That the default mode, the method in which most people are using Twitter, is that get it out to as many people as possible, and then hopefully it's going to get to the right audience. The default mode for a network like Facebook tends to be at the more private end of it, that most people are using it to communicate with a defined group of individuals. And there are other networks that are more private still, and most networks exist somewhere, say, along a spectrum from essentially being about this mass distribution to being about very micro distribution. So just thinking about the tools that we then use in order to enable people as far as we can, as system developers, to enable people as far as we can to achieve this golden objective, which is getting the right information to the right people and stopping the information getting to the wrong people. I would characterize them, broadly speaking, in three ways. The first I would call friction, the second attention, and the third curation. So by friction, I mean making it harder to do things, usually with a purpose. And it's generally anathema to computer system engineers. Computer system engineers generally don't like friction. They spend a lot of time and effort designing friction out of systems to make things as simple as possible. But it can be useful in the right places. There is a sort of model that says, before sharing something online, that the best way to prevent you accidentally sharing a drunken photo online would be to make sure when you upload a photo, a box pops up and says, are you sure you want to upload this photo? Are you really sure you? And we can pop up 3 or 4 boxes to say, hey, stop, think before you post this photo. Let's make sure you're really confident you want to do it. That would be friction which would have a purpose. You'd be much less likely to post something you regret. But the friction itself would be problematic, I think, for a typical person using a system. Most system designers would say, look, if we put that friction in the way of people and it's generally not useful, they're not going to use our service, they're going to move on to another. So system designers will try and design that sort of friction out of the system. Although they may want to leave somewhere it has particular usefulness. One of the ways in which you can do that is to make sure that the controls that you put in place are obvious. So the pop-up window mechanism is the kind of extreme end of that, but there are other ways that you can just put the right gentle amount of friction in there before you do something. You can put prompts on screen, you can wrap content around with some wording and some language that helps people to understand what it is they're doing. I think, again, thinking about how services use friction, they will generally inject it where things go wrong. So again, the holy grail of what we're trying to do is to make sure that we have a minimum possible amount of friction, but we also don't have any surprises. So where you see that a particular feature of your service is causing surprises, it's behaving in a way that people don't expect, that's again, typically as a service designer, you would try and inject friction in there, or try and redesign the service, that aspect of the service, so that it starts to function the way that people expect. And again, people within all of the social networks and with all the major websites are trying to think about that all of the time. The second aspect is this issue of attention, which I think is really important in understanding the impact of content. And in some ways you can think the harms that we're often worried about with internet content, particularly personal data on the internet, the actual amount of harm is really a combination both of the seriousness of the content, how bad was that photo, what drug were you taking in the particular photo that was being exposed, multiplied by the amount of attention that it gets. So a photo of you taking a particular illegal substance that is seen by 6 people, all of whom are your friends, is generally not regarded as harmful. The same photo put on the front page of a newspaper can be incredibly harmful to your reputation. And so the attention that something gets is critical. And there's sometimes, I think particularly in this space, an assumption that the whole of the internet community is the audience for any particular piece of content, because the whole of the internet community technically could look at it, but in reality the attention it got was very, very small. And so attention, I think, is a critical part of understanding whether or not something's likely to go wrong. And again, the systems that we put in place, that we design, often have that in mind. So, for example, we put in place a privacy control that offers you the chance to define the audience for some content. Well, actually, any single person who got hold of that content could make a copy and put it into a different environment, and so on. But in reality, the content is usually not interesting enough for them to do that, so the amount of attention it receives is relatively little. So we do focus on that. And when attention goes wrong, then it can have some negative consequences. I was going to find on here, the Daily Mail had some fun attention for me recently when, and this happens to all of us, I went and made I need to find the Daily Mail, made some comments to the Leveson inquiry on privacy and injunctions, and the Daily Mail then decided they put a researcher onto looking for my content online and managed to find that in 2009 I had set up a Facebook account when I first joined the company to try the new user experience, and this Facebook account had been sitting there since 2009, had 10 friends associated with the account and had nothing posted it since 2009. Now, it's clearly in breach of Facebook's rules, which prohibits us from having multiple accounts. Now, that account caused me no harm whilst it had no attention. It was sitting there and nobody was interested. Once the Daily Mail had said a researcher on it, it suddenly became harmful to me because it was now in a national newspaper. And they managed to dig up this wonderful photo of Richard Two Account Allen. I don't know where they got that from. That was a good bit of research, I thought. So attention is a critical part of it, and it was very interesting actually in the Leveson debate. It does seem to me, and maybe think about this, intuitively from yourselves, that stuff that is on social networks is typically, even if it has this potential wide distribution, it's just treated differently. We just have a different sense of it, and that's maybe more about the concept of something being authoritative. If it's in the Daily Mail, it's clearly authoritative because they do such a thorough job editing and researching, whereas if it's on a social network, it doesn't carry the same authority. And then the third element I just wanted to consider is the aspect of curation. So you have this concept of friction, which hopefully stops you from producing content or getting content to the wrong audiences, because it works in the right way. You have this notion of attention, and the stuff is getting the right amount of attention, and a lot of that is organic. Whether it's a search engine or it's a service like Facebook, a lot of the effort the engineers put into is to try and get the attention to the most interesting pieces, and we actually try and help things to get the right amount of attention. But the third aspect is curation, which typically you need either because you want to promote a positive aspect of the content that's relevant to you online, or because you want to somehow deal with the negative pieces of content. And again, that's an area where I think there's a lot of growing interest, and I'm actually looking at some of the work of Professor Mayer-schonberger, I think a lot of that's around that area of curation and what tools could or should service providers make available to assist in the curation process, to help people to make sure that over time the content that represents them online, the personal content about them online, is consistent with their expectation. I just wanted to then finish just by dwelling for a few moments on the latest iteration of Facebook, which is called Timeline, and just show how the examples of how some of these concepts kind of play through in the way that we're thinking about producing content. So if you think about now how one posts on Facebook on something like Timeline, we try and give you that setting that allows you to define the particular audience within the controls, very obvious on the site. We try in a relatively friction-free way to give you the controls that you need to decide the audience. So in the old days, the audience would be decided by going up, finding your privacy settings, and 3 or 4 clicks away you might be defining the audience that you wanted. Now you're defining the audience here online. Don't ask me who's in the restricted category. That's interesting, mostly journalists. So I'm going to share this with my friends, with my Facebook, except for the people I've determined to be restricted from stuff that I want to post. So we've done it in a relatively friction-free way, but we're still allowing you to make that determination about where that content goes. We're giving you a reasonable amount of tools to control the attention that something receives. So a particular piece of content that I've got somewhere on my timeline, if I want to make sure that receives more attention, then I'm able to change the size of it. I'm able to make it more prominent on my timeline. So I'm controlling the attention to a certain degree. And then we're also giving you more curation tools than you previously had, so I can now edit and remove particular pieces of content. So the way in which the service is thinking, and people, it's kind of, I know, quite a contentious development. What is Timeline for? Why is Facebook moving towards this particular model? But I think a lot of the thinking that lies behind this is precisely in this notion of giving people the controls they need to curate the content that is presented about them online. The other example I'd use, which is the one which is the entry point actually for Google's privacy policy. The entry point for a lot of people onto the internet is around images and stuff that turns up on Google search. There, again, think about some of the same concepts. When someone searches for me on Google Images, the first person they get is a French porn star, which is kind of interesting. But then I appear second. I don't know why Cliff Richard is so popular on my on this particular set of results. Here, obviously the tools that you have available are quite different because this is gathering collected data rather than hosted data. But again, you can think of some similar context, that there is a certain amount of friction in whether or not these photos get up, and there's something I can do about that. I can go back to the sources of websites that have photos I don't like, but that's actually very high friction or very, very challenging for me to try and remove original pieces of content that I don't have direct control over, although some people try to do that. The amount of attention that's received will be controlled actually largely by the extent to which people enter the correct search terms, and so they do get me rather than the French porn star. If I type that in, I would have got something different. Or of course, you can always cheat by having a name like Timothy Garton-Ash or Victor Mayer-schonberger, and then you'll only get the photos of yourself coming up. So unique names help in this environment. But otherwise, attention will be, to a degree, set either algorithmically by the search engines or by the user themselves who enters the search term. And again, in terms of curation, there's limited things that I can do around this. Again, I can go back to the original owners of these photos, or the original owners of the websites, and try and curate them on those websites. Or I can try and create new web properties that I then boost up the search ranking. So what comes out when you search for me is what I want you to see rather than anything else. And again, there's a whole industry developing around that. Wikipedia is the other, I guess, sort of interesting example of that. I think I have me on Wikipedia, where there'll be another set of concepts around Wikipedia. So if I search for myself there, I do roll up. Here there's a whole load of personal data about me, actually more personal data than actually typically comfortable with. But this personal data, if we think again about how this arrived, the friction is is very low. Wikipedia is designed for minimum friction. Anyone can come and edit anything. I mean, there couldn't be a system that's less designed for that, and the friction for the audience is minimal. Everything is open to everyone. So it's a minimum friction system. In terms of attention, that's largely, I mean, Wikipedia interestingly has again, as part of its core functions, it tries to make sure the attention goes to the right place. So they spend a lot of time on disambiguation. It's a word I learned to love. And they spend a lot of time on trying to direct people to exactly the right content. And there's an overriding sense that the attention you get will depend on your worthiness, as it were, in terms of people who choose to edit Wikipedia for having an entry and where they place it. And the curation is done, it's completely out of your hands. There's like millions of people out there who do the curation of that content. So I hope that's a helpful framework to start thinking about where social networks fit, not just against each other, but in the general context of this world where digital capture devices are ubiquitous and networks are increasingly ubiquitous. To give you a sense of what we're trying to do, I think in terms of some of the tools we're providing, and I welcome any discussion about whether or not we're actually achieving it.
What Richard did today was a masterful presentation, both of what is at store for us and how benign Facebook is. Masterful. Now, of course, Timothy wanted me to be here in order to challenge Richard. And so, in a way, I need to fulfill my purpose. I need to own my virtual dinner, so to speak, by being a little bit provocative about Facebook. Because that's the white elephant in the room. We're talking about Facebook. 820 million people. That's what Richard is representing. Now, let's talk a little bit about Facebook. Facebook is the big white elephant. Facebook is larger than Google. Social networking sites are larger than search engines, but Facebook is larger than Google. Together they have above 70% of the total worldwide internet traffic. But they are incredibly large. And Facebook is the largest. And so Facebook is the primary information intermediary. And that with the role of being the intermediary for almost 1 billion people and how they perceive, how they experience the digital world, brings with it some certain responsibilities. That goes without saying. If you're big, you need to play by the rules. If you're small and smart, you can skirt the rules once in a while. Now, therefore, if you are this important intermediary, you need to contend with a couple of criticisms. And I'll go through one or two just to sort of spice up the debate. One is that Facebook wants you to only have, we heard it before, one account. Because everything needs to come together, because they need to know what you are doing. Now, that is completely artificial. Because, as we know from the sociologist Rothman, about 50 years ago or so, humans have multiple stages. Not just one stage. They have multiple stages. They have multiple stages in which they operate very differently. Fusing that all together into one and only one stage is completely artificial and helps only one entity. The white elephant in the room called Facebook. Now, what happens as a result? Two things. One, people begin to hack Facebook. That is, they go into Facebook and take out more than one account. All of my students do that, sorry to say. And they have one beautifully curated public account and one totally crazy private account. And then others have 3 accounts and 4 accounts and 5 accounts, however many stages you want. Doing so violates the terms of service and makes you responsible or makes you vulnerable to be kicked out by Facebook. Tell you the second thing between the couple of us. Richard is not listening. They won't do much about it because they're in for an IPO. An IPO means that they need to show a success story. A success story means that they need to show growing membership numbers. They are not growing everywhere. Some villages in the North Arctic already have everybody signed up to Facebook. And so they need to show success in some untapped markets, and they can't show that, in fact, a lot of the additional gains of accounts that they have comes from people having second and third and fourth accounts. That it isn't 820 million people, but much less. So in a sense, this is a symbiotic relationship between the people that hack Facebook and Facebook, who is trying to hack the IPO. And one of the things that happens just as if you become big and successful, you need to contend with playing by the rules. And you need to also contend with the wishes and the preferences of a lot of the people. And if people vote with their feet by trying to hack or hacking Facebook in a different direction, then I think Facebook should reflect on it and realize that they might need to change direction. Now, I stop here bashing Facebook because I think the topic is larger, but I needed to stir up the pot a bit. The topic is larger because it is a topic about the future of privacy, in a way, on social networking sites and beyond. And when we look at all of these wonderful data protection laws that we have, personal identifiable information is defined as any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. An identifiable person is one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular, or by reference to an identification number, or to any one or more factors specific to his physical, physiological, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity. Which means today, everything. Yesterday it was just your name and your social security number and your passport number. Today it is everything. This company had to find that out the hard way. Netflix tried to improve its recommendation engine and therefore wanted to give a $1 million prize to the researchers who were improving its recommendation engine by more than 10%. In order to make that work, they made available a couple of million anonymized video rental files from their database, and it took researchers 48 hours to re-identify people in that database. Even if you try to anonymize it, you can re-identify it. You've heard of Google Street View and the tussles that they had in Germany, because in Germany people didn't want their houses to be part of Google Street View. And so they had an opt-out mechanism in place where you could sort of type in your address and they would obfuscate your house on Google Street View. The reason why people didn't want to be on Google Street View was because they thought that criminals are using Google Street View as a wonderful research tool to research targets, houses to break in. Because you could sort of look a little bit into the window and you could see how well it was guarded and all that. This is one of the first picture of a person opting out with his house in Bavaria. This is the house on the left. Now, let me ask you, what does this do? If you are a criminal trying to find a break-in opportunity, wouldn't you go after the house that's obfuscated? Because that person obviously has something to hide. What I'm saying here is that the non-signal is a signal. Or in our world, we cannot not signal anymore. And you can't not signal anymore either when you're at Facebook and when you change your status, relationship status that is, that of course can be accessed by the Open Graph API if you have set the privacy preferences accordingly. And then you can accumulate that, and we can have a wonderful presentation here of when relationships break up most frequently over the course of the year. And you find out that sort of before Christmas is really the hardest moment, where you sort of come clean and get rid of baggage that you might have to bring home for Christmas. That's wonderful in the aggregate, but you can break it down to the individual. And you can not only say who you have had a relationship with, but how many relationships over time, do all kinds of calculations that have sort of predictive value on your ability to keep a relationship and all these type of things. Same with photos. This is a picture of a map of London showing where people in London took photos and uploaded it then afterwards to Flickr, because they of course shared their geolocation when they used an iPhone doing that. Now that's wonderful to look at to find the perfect place to take the photograph in London, but when I disaggregate it down to an individual, I can actually start having profiles of where people are. So the question therefore is, are we at the end of what privacy experts call notice and consent? Is the whole idea of notice and consent at the end? Is it too complicated, conceptually too bogus, and too cumbersome in our world? Do we need to come up with something else? Maybe, but I think we need to have a debate. I tried to have the debate by suggesting if we need to reintroduce forgetting, and I'm not going to go into that because I want to just note that our American friends, our digital natives in America, but also the older ones in America, are very much in favor of deleting, very much in favor of a right to be forgotten. In fact, these are the numbers of how many in the United States would like a right to be forgotten. 92% total, digital natives, 88%, 65-year-olds, 90+%. There's something there. There's something there, a need that somehow people want the state to take on. I don't know exactly how it's done best. I've written a book about it, but I don't have a silver bullet solution for it. My final point is that people also become more and more uneasy about what I call the use of data exhaust. And that is that a lot of companies out there on the internet make money not through advertisement, but make money because what you do creates value directly to them, irrespective of advertising. And the prime example, of course, is this you have seen before. This is a reCAPTCHA. And a reCAPTCHA is a method by which the internet tries to find out, or an internet service tries to find out whether you're a human being or a robot. And if you can type in these squiggly letters, then you actually are a human being. Now, that was a company, reCAPTCHA, that was set up by Louis van Aan out of Carnegie Mellon University. The company was bought up by Google, and Google now offers this service to anybody, to any internet service around the world for free. If you need to test whether somebody is a robot or a human being, you can get that service for free. Why would Google do that? Because what millions and millions of people every single day do when they type in these squiggly letters is to proofread Google book scans for free. That's all.
Thank you very much, Victor. What I propose is that Richard should have a chance to respond. Could I suggest on the Facebook points, the future privacy points up to the end of notice of consent, and then perhaps we can have a round on the right to be forgotten timeline and all of that. Could we structure it that way?
Yep. So the points I won't pick up are anything related to the IPO at all, hopefully for obvious reasons. If it's not obvious, to just be aware of some people called the Securities and Exchange Commission, who are empowered to lock up any people who work for Facebook and talk about the IPO. So, the points I did want to pick up, though, were the ones about the one stage, multiple stages. I mean, for us, it's something we kind of agonize over. And as a company that offers an internet service, you are incredibly sensitive to what customers want all the time. They give you feedback, particularly if you've created tools that allow them to give you feedback in large numbers. But every time we've looked at it, we've come back to this central point, which is we think that the core of the success of Facebook, as opposed to any other comparable service, is the fact that when you make friends with someone and connect with somebody on Facebook, you have a reasonable expectation that they are who they say they are. And as soon as we try and make exceptions to that rule for whatever noble purpose, and it's particularly sensitive around issues to do with human rights activists, but as soon as you start to make exceptions from that, you're then left in the position of where do you stop? And so we come back to the central rule that, you know, one identity, one person on Facebook, not because we want to imprison you, but because that's the fairest thing to all the other people on Facebook. That when you connect with them, they have this reasonable expectation you are who you say you are. And if someone can come up with a magic formula that, you know, makes users even happier, we would look at it, but we've not found one yet that in aggregate makes everybody more happy than they are today. So that's one thing I just want to pick up. And the other one on the consent point, I mean, I think that is a very acute observation that a lot of the data, a lot of what we're doing now with internet services in particular is a deal. And you highlighted the recapture deal. That may not be a very visible deal to individuals, but whenever you're using the internet, you're entering into a deal. If you just go to what appears to be a regular website with no exchange of personal information on it, the chances are you are exchanging personal information because it's got an ad network on, that's got cookies on, that's collecting data, that's creating profiles, etc. I mean, that's like the internet is a series of deals, and it's that ad network that funds the content on that particular website that you're looking at. So it's not a wholly malicious deal. It just is a deal. It's a kind of package, and it is quite hard to pull out individual consents from those packages. So one of the ideas that I think we do need to look at is how do you make sure what is sufficient transparency around the deal that we can say a reasonable person is signing up to a reasonable deal that does involve transfers of personal data, rather than thinking that we can pull individual pieces out because then the deal itself falls apart. And I think that may be one of the areas, certainly in the review of the legislation, that we need to start thinking about, because historically there's been a lot of opposition to that notion. The idea is, you know, I can go to a website and I say, yes, I want the content, but I don't want the advertising. You know, the deal doesn't, it'd be like, well, actually we are getting, I guess, we catch up TV, I want the TV channels, but I don't want to absorb the advertising when I watch the TV channel, yet it's the advertising that pays for it. So we somehow need to, I think, understand how those bundles work.
Richard, could I just put you on that? So, I'm sure you've heard the word to be Zuckered.
No.
Well,
I'm about to, though.
yes, to be Zuckered means, named after the founder of a certain social network, means to be tricked into sharing more information that you think you're sharing, which was the charge made for some time against Facebook for privacy settings. So how transparent do you think your deal is now?
I mean, we think ours, I'm bound to say this, and maybe other people have different views on it, but we think we couldn't be much more transparent. On the front page of the website it says, this website exists so people can connect and share with each other. Everywhere you go across the site, you know, it's pretty obvious you're sharing data. And I have spoken to some people in the regulated community who take exactly that view. Look, if I look across the spectrum of what people are doing in terms of sneakily or abusively collecting personal data, Facebook is not top of the list, because you can't not know what you're doing when you go to a website that says it's all about sharing personal information. And we've worked on our data use policies and inline information. One of the trends that we're really working towards is saying, look, if you want people to understand what's happening on the service, actually privacy policies and things are very nice, but they're not the main event. You know, people do these surveys saying, did you read the privacy policy? And 90% of people say no. Of course they don't. But when you go to the website, it says, if you put information in here, you're sharing it with these people. And, you know, if the service works in an obvious way, you don't need to bury the stuff in the privacy policy.
Victor, did you want to come in on that one? No, but yeah, one other thing, which is real names.
Yeah.
about which, as you know, there's a huge argument, particularly in countries where giving your real name can be dangerous. I mean, Wire-Konim is often cited, although that would have been as the administrator of a page, I think, rather than actually his own personal page. But I think there are cases, some of our team will know more detail of people arriving at the airport in a nasty place and the security service saying, we've been looking at your Facebook page. So shouldn't people have, under such circumstances, the right to assume it?
No, I mean, again, this comes back to the point that we agonize over. I mean, the first thing to understand is just technically, using a fake name on Facebook, if you live in a country where the government controls the internet service providers, provides you with no protection whatsoever. I mean, they know the traffic that comes from your house, so whether you use your real name or a fake name, you've got no protection at all. There are some technologies that can give you that kind of protection, but I don't think the name is the main protective measure. So that's just a contextual point. It might help to obscure your identity, and so it's something, of course, we have looked at because people have said to us, I would love to be able to do that. But firstly, we have this issue of, how do we decide who the good guys are, the bad guys are? So at the moment, our real name policy is applied universally. If the secret police in a particular country want to come and create fake IDs to catch people, we throw them off as well. So it's important to us that we just apply it in this uniform manner. And secondly, I'd say that the power of the platform is dependent on these real connections. So you could imagine a situation where we've decided to allow this, and we have 500,000 people all calling each other variants of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck in a particular country, trying to organise political campaigns. I would contend that political campaign is not going to be nearly as powerful because it has no credibility as a political campaign which may have 100,000 people, but those people are represented in their real identities.
Let me bring in the audience. Who would like to jump in? Questions, comments? There is a roving microphone. Ryan at the back. You can probably just shout, I think.
Yeah, that will be fine. So I have a personal anecdote that I want to share. First of all, I think that the new lists on Facebook and circles on Google+, I think they actually have eliminated the need for pseudonyms because you can directly decide who you want to share with who. So I agree with you on that, Lord Allen. But in terms of something that's happened to me in the past few months, this only works when the actual custom settings stay the same and don't change. So if there's a technical glitch, this can have serious implications. In the past few months, I've noticed twice that my default setting has gone from a limited setting to all of my friends, which it was a pretty banal matter that I was talking about. But that went on for 2 weeks before I even noticed it, and then saw that a friend's parent or one of my parents' friends had commented on my status and realized. Yeah. So while it may not matter for me, the work that I'm doing is on gay men in the Middle East and how they use the internet. 2 of the men that I spoke to, both Emiratis, their parents found out that they were gay via Facebook. It was their own fault. They put up photos publicly of them and their boyfriends. But one had to go seek asylum in the UAE, and the other one is in a better situation now. But the problem is, if they were in my situation, assuming these default settings are working and they're not, it could have serious privacy and safety implications for them. So how can we deal with this when we're not sure that the settings are actually going to work, as in my case it proved they're not always?
Yeah. I mean, on that, the setting is supposed to be sticky. So it should, next time you post, it should be set at whatever it was the last time you posted for the status update. So there may be some lack of clarity on our part about exactly how that works, which I will take that as feedback that clarity is not there. I mean, we put the icon on deliberately, again, to try and act as a reminder, but I understand if people are posting every day, the stuff you see every day stops standing out, doesn't it? So I can only take that as feedback on 2 things. One is, probably 3 things actually. The first is, have we sufficiently explained how that setting is supposed to work? Secondly, are the icons doing the job they should do in terms of reminding us? I completely agree. The last thing we want is people to be surprised about the audience they post to, particularly if it's something sensitive. And the third is there may have been an error, which is something you can never discount. But if we have particular instances, we do dig into those and try and find out what went wrong.
I think it was an error in this case, but just more generally, another thing that happened recently, when you start to tag friends, your friends, or friends of those friends can also see your posts. I didn't see any notification of that before it went out. There was no pop-up box that said, do you know these settings have changed in this specific setting?
Yeah.
So again, it was another month before I realized and saw random people commenting on my
Right.
Facebook.
I think, again, that's supposed to be, it's supposed to be visible with a hover on the icon.
But not everyone is going to do that every single
Yeah,
day. I noticed from one day to the next that it's changed, which could have serious implications.
Yeah, I completely accept that as feedback.
But I think, Richard, this is a larger conversation in a way of the responsibility that Facebook faces. We have hundreds of millions of users. And yes, for us, these may be trivial little mistakes that happen, but somebody else might lose his livelihood, or might lose his life or her life with such a trivial mistake. In that sense, Facebook becomes very responsible and needs to be more responsible. Are you lawyering up as Google did and become more responsible?
Lawyering up is an interesting verb. I would say, from genuine personal experience, that whenever we get instances where things have gone wrong, particularly where they've been damaging to individuals externally, whether it's our fault or it's just a function of the system, the debate internally is quite profound and involves a lot of people within the company. And that there are situations, for example, the human rights situations that we've seen across the Middle East, we have put in place procedures to make sure that where we get alerts about people in situations of danger, we can help respond to those. So, not perfect, but travelling, I think, in the right direction in terms of understanding that responsibility.
Sorry, just explain that a bit more. You get alert that somebody is in danger in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So for example.
So people will tell us all the time. I mean, we get feedback all the time, just sort of getting here today. And it would not be unusual for me to come to a meeting like this and somebody would say, I'm working with gay men in Uganda and there's a real issue around threats to life. And the business card gets passed, and then I start getting alerts about gay men in Uganda, which, as soon as I'm aware of them, I absolutely need to make sure that we've dealt with.
And you do what?
And we get that consistently. So in that case, we will make sure that the people who can review what's happening with a particular piece of content, so like there might be a page calling for death to X person or Y person, we have people reviewing those reports every day anyway, because they just come through the regular channels. But where we have contact with individuals who are working in those environments, we're trying to make sure that those alerts get given the attention that they need.
But just to be clear, are you then making a sort of editorial judgment?
No, we're applying our own standards.
Right.
It's an attention question. So it's not a change of the standards, but it's making sure that where there's a situation, particularly if it's one that's repeated and systematic, that's problematic, that gets the attention it needs to be resolved, rather than just relying on sort of random inputs. So we're sort of systematizing our responsiveness.
I want to give a little bit of pushback.
Yeah.
To an extent, it seems to me that this is Zuckerberg all over again, sort of having this very naive American conception of more free speech and more transparency is always the right thing, and therefore, if we spread it just around the world, it'll be okay too. I mean, surely large corporations in the internet space like Google and others have the hard way found out that it's not as simple. Just talk about China with Google. To what extent are you as a company going to shed over time that fundamental sort of naive transparency DNA or cultural value that your founder has imbued?
I hope never.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's very interesting the analogy you draw with, perhaps censorship in some regimes. That we've created a system which is avowedly about openness and connection. It's based on, you can call it a naive view, that the world will be a happier place overall if we are more open and connect more with each other. That's our kind of thesis. And to then start designing the system to close stuff down and to self-censor or force people back into more closed boxes, it really is countercultural. But that does mean in some circumstances that our system may be inappropriate for people to use because it is, by definition, trying to create this openness and connectivity.
So let me follow up on that. China, huge issue for Facebook, as I know from conversations at your headquarters. And the difficulty here is everything about Facebook says open sharing, this is this kind of space. Even if you called it, you know, Weibo Facebook or something else, Baidu Facebook or something else, people would still go to it with this feeling that it's about openness and sharing, not all of them realizing that that also means sharing with the Chinese authorities and security services.
Can we go back to talk about the IPO?
It's easy.
The other sensitive subject, China. Yes, I think in a way you've encapsulated exactly the challenge that a company like ours faces. That we have a system which is designed for openness and sharing and this kind of connectivity, where national governments are uncomfortable about that. That then.
But they don't mind the sharing as long as it's with them.
Yeah, I think that, yeah. But where they're uncomfortable and where they create a particular framework for doing that. Clearly today actually, our service is globally available, but if people try and log in from China, it's typically not available. That's the actual situation. The decision by whoever has made that decision to make it unavailable clearly reflects a view about the impact of our service. The question then for any service provider, as Google faced, is do you then adapt your service in order for them to allow the connectivity? And clearly in our case, that's not yet happened.
I mean, it's a huge issue because your transparent deal in this case would actually have to say, you must be aware that anything you share with your friends on this place will also be available to secret police. If you were genuinely being transparent.
And in a sense, that deal is the same here. If you're using it in the UK, or if you're using any internet service provider, the police in the UK have a statutory legal right. I mean, we can talk about this in degree, but they do have a statutory legal right to capture the data across any internet connection with a warrant from the Secretary of State.
But
With a warrant.
with a warrant from.
With procedures. It's not like I am from the Chinese authority and give it to me.
But what I mean is the deal always includes supervision, or state supervision is part of the deal of operating a telecom service globally. The nature of that state supervision will vary from country to country.
Yeah.
And then there's great conditions whereby people are very uncomfortable.
Agreed. Okay. There's a question here.
When you're making decisions about universal rules. When you're making decisions about...
Could you perhaps introduce yourself?
David Newman.
Thank you.
When you're making decisions about universal rules, the temptation is to think the world is rather like the place where all the decision makers live. So maybe you might think some of your decision makers might move to like 1 mile north of where I used to live on the Newton Ards Road in Belfast, where the risk is not from the government getting your data, but the Ulster Volunteer Force or the real IRA. And people have, over the 18 years I was there, found ways online and face-to-face of dealing with it which don't quite fit in with any official policies of Facebook or Google Plus or anything else. And it might be a learning experience to think not just about countries where the danger is from the government, but other groups of people who tend to arrange, as happened last June, a full-out fight with petrol bombs across the border and so on.
That's helpful. We take as a starting point, it's quite an interesting debate we sometimes have internally about I guess, the classic sort of sense of the wisdom of crowds kind of debate. We tend to come from the starting point that the people using our service will be smart and will figure out ways to use the service that are adapted for them. And they can do that in ways that don't necessarily flatly breach our rules. But I mean, I take the point entirely where a particular local set of circumstances applies. I mean, the smart community response is to use the service in a way that's appropriate for them. Or I say, if there is no way to use it in a way that works for you, then you may look at other tools.
Can I ask a follow-up question? You do monitor your competition as well, I imagine. And so with other services like Diaspora coming up that are more decentralized and offer more of a sort of protection of individual nodes, could you foresee a situation where you say to certain groups in certain countries, go and use Diaspora, don't use us?
I think it'd be unlikely that we would ever say that. But you know, the activists who are advising them, you know, and they do that today. There are lots of people who give advice to human rights activists that are not us, and they will advise on the most appropriate tools for a particular situation, and that's exactly right. I mean, that's how it should work.
But just again, if I may just follow up on this, because it's an issue with our project, the free speech debate, which is the tension between attempting to work towards global norms, universal norms, and local norms. And you have, in effect, and this is not a criticism, it's simply a statement of historical fact, you've globalized First Amendment norms, just as Google has. And now you're in this kind of strange grappling with other norms in other cultures.
Yeah, and I think they are so, you know, talk about the DNA of a system or a company, they're so embedded in our DNA that whilst people will chip away at them, and there are particular instances, you know, that are a condition of operating anywhere, actually. I mean, people in every country globally will have some pieces of content that they say are beyond the pale and so on, and we'll try and force that upon us. But our starting point is that First Amendment position.
But it's not that, I mean, it seems like, or at least you're portraying it in a sense that you have incorporated this First Amendment culture as being sort of a free-flow culture, and it has unfortunate and negative side effects, and therefore for certain communities it's not as good. But the First Amendment comes with more baggage than that.
Yeah.
There are certain information flows that under the First Amendment doctrine in the United States, you don't get any protection, any constitutional protection. Think about pornography. Think about violations of intellectual property. So in other words, what we are incorporating through Facebook is not just sort of the benign version of this sort of First Amendment openness of free flows, but also a very American view of what shall be protected with respect to intellectual property or illegal content.
Yeah, I think it's more of I think you have a set of values that are defined by the creators of that space. And those values, in the case of Facebook, for example, we would be very keen to protect political speech, but we ban all nudity and pornography. Now, we don't have to ban all nudity on Facebook, except for breastfeeding, which we do allow, even though people say we don't, we do. But we don't have to, that's another issue. But we don't have to ban nudity, but we do because Facebook would be a very different kind of community if it allowed nudity, and we all know what it would turn into. So we have a set of things that we're interested in, and then we have the law applied across multiple jurisdictions. The starting position being the US law, but then actually now with layers and layers on top. An analogy I think of, and I keep meaning to write down, is I feel like large internet spaces like ours are like offshore islands of the US. So essentially sort of covered by US law essentially. And then when they first start off, the only question for other countries is, do you want your citizens to visit this island? Will you allow them visas to go to this island or permits? And they can decide yes or no. And then over time you get countries that more and more want you to fence off a bit of the island and say, okay, in this bit can you apply the local restrictions.
In addition to the...
our citizens can go to that island as long as you stop them gambling, or our citizens can go to that island as long as you stop them engaging in politics or whatever it is. And then the tension for us is, do we try and just say no, give them a visa, yes or no, all in, all out? Or do we start saying, okay, it's so important that they're still allowed on the island that we start to adjust the island, or do we adopt the norms of every country and end up with a kind of a common global set of norms for that island?
Do you foresee balkanization then? In the sense that sort of at the end of the day, every Facebook user then has his or her own set of rules depending on the exact comminglement of local, regional, and US norms that apply to him or her?
I would say philosophically we don't want to do that, and there's for a very fundamental reason, that again, Facebook exists to connect a global community. So if you look at some other internet service providers, the way they've got around this is to use local domains, to get google.com, google.fr, google.de, and they censor or apply local law through those local domains. You could argue it's a little bit of a fiction because everyone can still go to google.com, but they kind of make that work. There is only one facebook.com because I want to talk to my cousin in the United States or my friend in Germany or my friend wherever in the world within a common environment. I don't want to go to facebook.uk. It makes no sense. So we, for a design reason, don't want to end up in that space. But of course there's pressure, and this is not a Facebook issue, this is a much bigger issue. If you follow World Summit on Information Society and the Internet Governance Forum and the ITU debate, International Telecommunications Union debate, that's all about do you get a common set of global standards for internet content? Do you have regional standards? How are those enforced?
Another question right at the back.
Hi, my name is Mariam Amidi. I work for Free Speech Debate. We've spoken a bit about sort of privacy and privacy settings on Facebook. We haven't really spoken much about transparency outside of Facebook, elsewhere on the internet. So I know Facebook has been accused of creating shadow profiles of people who are not members, or using the like button to follow users after they've logged out of Facebook, tracking users using cookies and things like that. And that is an area where I feel like there's very little understanding by users. I mean, what are you doing to sort of ensure that your users are aware of the sort of data that's being collected on them when they're not logged into Facebook?
Yeah. So I think the biggest step forward we took in this was to be put through an audit by the Irish Data Protection Commission, who are regulators here in Europe, and they finished that just in December. So they went and looked into all these different aspects of our policy, and they've come up with some recommendations or requirements that we've accepted. For example, being very transparent about how that data is used, and they accepted that we don't create shadow profiles of non-users. In fact, if you go to Facebook and you're not a user, you don't see any advertising. There's nothing we're doing, unlike actually advertising networks who do track people across the internet and use cookies to do advertising to them. Facebook only advertises to its own users, and they looked into what data do we use to make that advertising happen, and they produced again, in terms of transparency, a fully open report about what they found, and we now have a work program which leads up to a second review in July to explain that. So that bit is transparent, and then they've asked us also to make sure that we do follow some good old data minimization principles, that we justify, for example, the use of any logs that we do hold, and that we delete that data or anonymize it when it's no longer necessary. And again, in that report, you'll see a program that will take us to a place where we've significantly reduced the retention times for social plugin data, for example, meaning that we'll say now, trust us, we're not doing these bad things with it, but in future, it'll be, trust us, we couldn't do the bad things with it because we've actually got rid of it, and that's part of that Data Protection Authority program.
Now, sorry, Mariam, did you want to come back?
But it kind of feels like Facebook makes these sort of changes, whether it's privacy settings or whether it's installing infrastructure elsewhere on the internet, then will be reprimanded, will apologize, will backtrack, and yet at the same time it still feels like your overarching aim is to erode online privacy by stealth. You'll kind of make these changes, you'll apologize or backtrack, and yet all the time you're pushing the boundaries, aware that this is a kind of like an ultimate aim, it seems. Changing sort of social norms, basically, which is kind of what you said is in line with your ideals.
I could say yes and really surprise you, but no. No, I don't think that's a fair characterization at all. I think genuinely, and again, let me just step back a second for how internet service providers work more generally. People build internet systems that they think do really cool things, and their goal is to get everybody using their cool system. And they tend to start collecting and accumulating data. And they don't, I mean, genuinely, they don't typically think about getting rid of the data. That's not the way that you start building internet service. So most small internet services, wherever they are, wherever in the world they start, will build up user bases and accumulate data just in case it's useful one day. And then they'll get to a certain size where they start lawyering up, as Victor puts it, and they start working with regulators. And they may not have been doing anything evil, they just haven't paid a lot of attention to this stuff. And then the regulators say to them, you know, we do have these very clear principles, data minimization, making sure that you have consent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they start tidying up to get into much better shape. And I think that's a typical trajectory actually for internet companies. I don't think Facebook's any exception to that process of, I really would reject the idea that you're doing anything evil with this stuff. You're simply trying to make your service as useful as possible and get people engaged with it. But we do have a legal framework we need to respect.
And make money, I mean, which is not necessarily evil, but isn't that more the point? It's not that you're doing anything evil, is that there is a tension between privacy and profit.
Well, not necessarily, actually. There's not necessarily a tension between privacy and profit. There are some things you can do that are more profitable, that are not good.
But the more Facebook knows about its users, the better it can sell customized advertising, and therefore the more money it will make. I mean, that's
But again, within limits, you've got to make that sustainable. And if you look, Mark wrote an interesting letter that went with the thing I can't talk about, but he wrote an interesting letter to try and describe Facebook culture. And it's worth looking at. I mean, test us against it, but it was sincere from his point of view. The motivation is, you could call it megalomania, the motivation is to get everybody using the service over the long term. And there's lots of things you could do to make money in the short term that would run counter to that objective. And I think to date, actually, the balance has been right. You need the money to keep the wheels on the bus. You want it to be a profitable and sustainable business. And I think in the internet sector, we sometimes, because it's so easy to build a prototype of anything on the internet, we sometimes underestimate how hard it is to build a long-term sustainable service and how much money is needed for that. So he wants to do that, but I would reject the idea that it's a kind of profit-motivated machine as opposed to a connectivity and naive addiction to openness-motivated machine. He's going to contest me now.
Leaving that on the table, I see several hands up. Can I suggest we group a few questions, and then I hope we'll have a passage on the right to be forgotten. So first, Andreas there, then in the blue sweater down there, and then up there.
Thank you. Andreas Knab, St. Anthony's College. A comment and a question for Professor Schonberg, is it? Mayer-Schonberger. Mayer-Schonberg, yes. So during your presentation, I couldn't help but think of a sort of Captain Swing, this noble hero who sort of stands athwart history, crying stop in a way, who stands in the way of a socially useful, popularly desired technological innovation, in this case a service that's offered entirely for free. And so I was wondering whether you could sort of state in 3 areas which you addressed what precisely it is that you feel Facebook is doing wrong, either juridically or morally. The first, Facebook as a sort of benign hegemon. You said that Facebook, being the biggest player, needs to play by the rules. So I was wondering what precisely the rules are that you feel Facebook is breaking. Then secondly, the right to delete or the right to be forgotten. How is what Facebook does different when it isn't actually more favorable than what CCTV does or what a government collection of data does? And thirdly, the user as consumer. You gave the example of Google Books, so this tool where users essentially help Google Books. So what exactly is wrong with that? And isn't it in fact that is being rendered by using this particular application. And then finally, to sort of summarize, what exactly is it that you propose? And wouldn't what you propose actually be opposed by many, many more people than currently oppose what Facebook does?
Okay, now Victor, if you could hold that. It's quite a lot to hold. If you could hold it, we'll take a few more and we'll build the right to be forgotten discussion into the next round. So, okay, there and then the blue sweater.
No, go for it. No, go.
Okay, my question is more away from the political and into the personal, about this naive belief that everybody knowing everything about everybody else is a good thing and will make social interaction more interesting. Do you really believe that? Because isn't that like absolutely horrible? And I know this for a fact, like one anecdote from my Facebook experience is, I have a friend and she's been to a city that I want to visit and but I haven't talked to her in 2 years now. I'm going to write to her saying, hi, I want to go to the city and do you know a good place to stay or something? And then I click send. And then the next thing that comes up is the message that she sent to me 2 years ago saying, hi, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you in such a long time. Please give me some news. And I haven't done that for 2 years. It's really fucking embarrassing. And don't you think that this ambiguity in human relations is like that? Essentially, not having every information is very important to the ambiguity that makes human relations interesting.
Okay, very interesting question. And the blue sweater, yeah.
Question for Richard. Richard, you talked a lot about giving users the opportunity to curate, giving them a responsibility as to what they post and what they share. But then we also saw the very interesting stat that 90% of the American citizens would like to have the opportunity to be forgotten. And for me, that's the core reason for that is that there is a paranoia and a lack of understanding as to what are the potential dangers that the internet creates. And it seems like there is such a paranoia regarding Facebook too, right? And it seems that Facebook has created a lot of safeguards for it, but people are still afraid. To me, people don't understand what the business model of Facebook is, and they think that Facebook is basically taking private data and making money in a malignant way based on that data. It seems though that you want to explain that. Why isn't there more discussion as to how exactly Facebook is using that data, which data it's shedding, and what is its business model, what is the purpose of it?
Thank you very much. We'll take one more.
Yeah, I have a very practical question that is important for me as a Facebook user. Is it possible to delete information from timeline in bulk? Because it will take me ages to review all my posts for 5 years, and I'm sure that I posted something stupid that would I regret as an Oxford student now.
Thank you very much. It's actually wonderful because that takes us to this whole area. What I'm going to suggest is that Victor goes first, but if you could bring in the right to be forgotten issues, the deletion of account issues, the rewriting your past issues, and then we'll come to Richard, and perhaps if you could take that in too. Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I think you mischaracterized what I was trying to communicate with the points that I made in my presentation. So let me, because that's surely my fault in not having communicated it adequately, try and state it again. First, I wanted to say that Facebook is a very large white elephant, not necessarily a hegemon. And therefore, with that particular role also come certain responsibilities that a lot of other large internet and information technology companies like Microsoft or Google have faced before. What then will happen is that Facebook will have to face that responsibility and adjust its behavior accordingly. And that is already underway, and more of that will happen and be underway. But Facebook cannot pretend that it is sort of outside of that dynamic. That was my only big criticism of the Facebook. And then I tried to actually take our discussion a little further and say, if I were to think about privacy and the big challenges of privacy, there's two. One is that the fundamental idea of asking the individual to read a privacy notice and then to consent to it wholesale is ridiculous. 42 pages of privacy notices and then to consent to it, nobody is doing that. And so the whole mirage of notice and consent that the European as well as the US privacy principles are built on is something of a problem kid. And in our intertwined network world, maybe we need to think about something else. And one way of thinking about it is to think about regulatory constraints rather than individual mechanisms for individual expression. And this is where the right to forgotten comes in, because the right to forgotten is a right that takes place after behavior happened. It saves you after you have spilled the milk, so to speak, to the extent that it can be done. And that might be more useful in the world that we are in now. And then I said finally that users are also uneasy about the fact that companies make money off their interactions with others. Not so much on the advertisement side, but just on their general behavior. And this is also something that causes unease, and therefore some regulatory action will happen in this field. And at this point in time, we still can shape it, and so it's important to have a conversation about that, which leads me then to sort of the forgetting issue. Without trying to do the Reader's Digest version of the forgetting argument, forgetting is important. It is important because it balances information power. And B, it is important because it is part of how we deal with time and the evolution of time. And I could go into details, but I don't at this point in time. Now, once we understand that forgetting is important, then we have to think about how to operationalize it. And one way of doing that is to say, look, let's give people a chance to set an expiration date for stuff that they share on Facebook. If I have a status update and I then can set a date and say this status update will be accessible for 2 months but not after that, or for 6 months but not after that, and I can always go back and change that if I want to, then I have a certain granularity for those that want to exercise that particular right. Without constraining very much the behavior of those that won't want to exercise that right, and that's why I suggested that.
Richard, if I could come to you, but if I could just sharpen 2 points there. One is, can I rewrite my own history on timeline? Can I rewrite it, as we all do in everyday life all the time? Secondly, can I really delete it all from Facebook?
Yeah. So jumping straight into those, there is a setting that allows you to set all your historic information to friends only, but there isn't one that creates the mass deletion. And we have, I mean, it's a really interesting debate around deletion. We have an assumption, I think, built into the way that we do the design, which is that most of the people who use our service, their primary interest is in making sure the data is there available for them in the future. So the primary interest actually is in the fact that we don't delete the data erroneously or delete it and then that they find it's unrecoverable. And that's particularly around things like photos and so on, where many people now will only have that collection of photos on Facebook and they'll have years of them. That's the only place where like the whole collection is. So our starting point is that retention by the individual user, not by us, but is the primary interest of that individual user rather than deletion. We provide the deletion tools, so you can go through and delete any content individually. And timeline we would see as a major step forward in that all of that data was previously in your Facebook account, but not visible to you. Now all the data is visible to you. If you want to delete it, you do have to go through individually and delete those individual items.
And what about edit, the edit button?
The edit button allows you to delete it. You can change the audience for historic posts, and you can delete historic posts, or you can change their prominence on your timeline. So
but you cannot rewrite.
3 options.
But you can't rewrite.
You can't rewrite it. No. What you can do
And
is
so one might ask you the philosophical question: why not?
because we would say you should come back and put another post on if you want to. And what we've now
But can I date it to the 30th
Yeah,
of
we
March?
now offer you the ability to put things back into your timeline.
So I can falsify my history.
Well, you can create your own history.
No, I can falsify my history. I can, in fact. I can insert something timed to a date 6 years ago.
You can insert a life event rather than a regular posting. So you can insert that you changed a job, that you did various things in your life. I'll have to check, but I'm pretty confident you can't just do a regular status update. It's more putting something into your history that was relevant to you.
But thereafter, the user could not tell whether that was created 6 years later or
now. No.
So I can rewrite my history.
Yes.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Muddying the waters.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Never
But
mind.
why would we have a
Why
problem with
would
that? Because the timeline is how you want to present yourself to the world. So it's philosophically consistent. The timeline is your space for you to present yourself to the world. As long as the people who view your timeline are content with that, then there's no reason for us to interfere.
As a historian, I might have a problem with that.
You might. We can do a deal with the Bodleian Library to kind of... No, story. We won't do that. I want to come back to a deletion point. So deletion, if you want to delete data, it is deleted. That's our policy. There have been some instances where researchers have found individual pieces of data that were not properly deleted. Again, our policy is very clear that where those are reported to us, we try and find out why that didn't happen, because our goal is, if users want to delete data, for that data to be deleted. The challenges, the classical technical challenges around where it's stored and making sure you delete it in every possible location. In terms of is more knowledge a good thing? I mean, one of the really interesting areas for me is that we're having to, I think, develop new social customs. If you think of what social networks do, and they're not the first technology to do this, telephones did it, various forms of technology have done it, is they allow you to have an extra group of people in your social circle that you have perhaps a lighter relationship with. So I have a cousin in America, and social networks only been around 8 years, but 10 years ago, my cousin in America I had practically no contact with on a daily basis. I didn't know what was going on in his life. Now I know what's going on in his life, and we interact once or twice a month in quite a gentle, nice way. And we have had to develop new social customs for how that interaction should happen, when it is now normal to have people who contact you once every 2 years and have that kind of guilt feeling. I mean, that exists because there is this technology that wasn't there before.
But the point is, like, this is my interaction with this person, and Facebook is telling me how to have that interaction, but there's no way I can opt out of having a dialogue with this person. And so I feel Facebook is telling me I should be having a dialogue with all 500 of my friends constantly, and these are people that I don't need to have.
How are we telling you to have a dialogue?
Because you always
Reminding.
send a dialogue of every little message. There is no way to just send a message once. It always adds it to the message
Previous thread.
they have been sent before.
Again, I think that, I mean, a lot of these things were, sorry, I hadn't thought of that one before, so I'm thinking now, but when we design things, we tend to design them for how we think most people want to use them most of the time, and we would expect people to want it to be threaded. But I'll take that away as a kind of design.
Did you want to come in on this point?
If I may, yeah.
Is it specifically on this point?
No.
No, okay, then we'll come back.
And right to be forgotten more generally.
Yes.
So right to be forgotten more generally, we offer people the ability to remove the stuff that they've got, and they've got various options to remove stuff that they've posted up on Facebook. The area where I think there's a lot of thinking to be done, it's much more contentious, is around the right to remove personal data that other people own about you and have put somewhere. As Victor described, the concept of personal data is now so broad that you could argue that a right to be forgotten means that if anyone has ever posted any image of you or any comment about you anywhere, that the right should be interpreted as a right to have that image or that content removed. And that, I think, throws up an enormous set of questions around the balance between freedom of speech and privacy rights, which we haven't really started to kind of tease out. People have... well, you may have.
But Richard, what I never understood, and here I have the perfect Facebook person to ask this question. What I never understood is I always hear that from Facebook, like, oh, but there are these special cases where somebody else is writing about you and you want to have this taken down. Yeah, that's all okay. But if that's the case, these are the complicated cases, why can't you just implement the expiration date for the ordinary, for the simple cases? What would keep you from having the expiration functionality built in for the status report, for the status messages that I put up myself, so that they go down into oblivion after a certain period of time? Why not having that?
I think some reasons we haven't felt a huge user demand for that, and in fact, as I started talking before, I think the contrary would apply. I think most of our users would be extremely upset if their status updates and images started disappearing. Even though we may have explained that technology to them, I don't think that's their current expectation. If social attitudes changed and that became the norm and that's what people accepted, you would expect companies to respond to that. But at the moment, the feedback we get is, my Facebook data is mine, it's precious, I don't want anyone removing it.
So you bought a company last year called Drop.io.
Yeah.
Drop.io was the world's largest file-sharing company where you could share files with somebody else, like Flickr, for photos and so forth, but general files with expiration dates. You bought this. What was the reason behind that? Did you want to take an interesting idea off the market or incorporate it into a product in the future?
All I know is I work with hordes of clever, enterprising people.
Okay, I'll rest my case here.
Was there something else? There was something else. Oh, the advertising of the business model. Do we want to come to that? Or
there was a question.
I think we do need to be upfront about it. We are upfront. If you go and look we've got an about section on advertising, which is really good, and it takes you through how the advertising model works. I think we have two challenges. One is a presentational challenge that nobody believes us when we say we don't sell data. They just assume we do. And the second challenge, I think, is this broader debate about internet business models. And it was to us that there were sort of three options that you could follow with a social networking type model. You could charge a subscription fee. And we're absolutely clear. If you talk about surveys and what people do and don't want, the number one thing they don't want is to pay a subscription for a service like ours. We're really clear about that. The second one is to sell data, collect data and sell it. And there are people who have data broking businesses. And we were really clear that that's not a sustainable business model. You can't sort of build a business over 20 or 50 years by buying data, collecting data and selling it. Although some people do that on the internet, they tend not to be household names because it's not a popular thing to do. And the third was the targeted advertising model. And when we look at that, we're thinking of it really like, a specialist publication. If you've got Ski Monthly, it's got advertising for skiing in it, and people who like skiing buy it. And we think of ourselves, that targeted advertising model, as essentially being, a combination of Ski Monthly and Surf Monthly and Geeks Monthly and whatever it is you want. That's what you're getting when you go to our service. So we see that as not, as actually quite a benign model. Again, it doesn't involve the transfer of this data externally. It simply involves shipping adverts to you that you may find interesting because you've expressed an interest in that activity or whatever it is. But we recognize we've got a long way to go to convince people that that is as benign as we think it is.
Could I just come in, because you very, very kindly sent me a long explanatory email about what happens when you delete the account.
Yeah.
Can I read a bit of it? Because I'm not sure I understand it.
No.
And I want to, in respect of content posted in places not under the user's control, right? The following will happen. Any place that the person had previously been tagged and had a hyperlink created, such as a photo tag, will go to a dead link, non-clickable, as if the person who tagged that content had simply typed a name in full. So the name will exist as a piece of text, but will not link to anyone.
Yeah.
So your name will still be on it.
Yeah, and it's functionally equivalent to what you could write on any photo.
So you'd posted that, you'd shared it, now you want to delete it, but in effect you can't in the end because your name would still be on it.
No, but it's not your photo. This is somebody else's photo. You can delete your photos, but...
And they disappear everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
If I delete my photos, they all disappear. But if you had posted a photo of me, and you'd link to Richard Allen with a tag, and I, Richard Allen, delete my account, that no longer links, but it still says Richard Allen in the same way that if you typed underneath the photo, this is Richard Allen.
Right.
It's just not a Facebook link.
Any content that the person posted elsewhere will remain, but will no longer be linked back to the user. You will still be able to see whatever was posted, but it will be labeled as coming from
a Facebook user.
A Facebook user.
Yeah.
Right. I think I've got it.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to ask any question on the account deletion? Is this on the account deletion? Brian, very quickly, you can shout.
Yeah, so basically my question is that I read today that when you delete an account, your account goes into pending deletion mode.
Yeah.
How long does that typically last?
Typically for 2 weeks. And there are two fundamental reasons for that. One, the overriding one is error. So again, thinking of this account as having 5 years of your family photos in, and your funny friend at school or college having leant over and pushed the delete option, we don't actually want to delete it unless we're really sure that that's what you want. And the second is the law enforcement reason. Again, we don't want somebody who's done something horrendous just pushing the delete button, there being no way of discovering what it was they'd done. So we've come up with 2 weeks as being a reasonable period of time, and after that the physical deletion process starts.
And hang on, automatically it starts? You don't have to answer an email and confirm?
No, you've asked to delete your account.
Yeah.
So your account is now in the queue for deletion.
Yeah.
Assuming you do take no other action, the deletion will start. And then just be clear, from the day you press delete, nobody else in the rest of the world should be able to see that data. The only people who can recover it are Facebook technicians.
Right.
Nobody else.
Got it. Was it on deletion specifically? Yeah. Very quickly, Andres.
Yes, just on pictures, say. So if I delete a picture 10 years from now, 20 years from now, is there some database that retains that picture at Facebook? Who can retrieve it? How? And is there the threat of hacking and that sorts of thing once I've deleted content?
So if you delete a picture from your account, it should now, I think we're now saying 45 days should be the maximum time for that to disappear completely. It actually in practice disappears much more quickly in most cases. There have been some stories for complete transparency about the caching services that people use, content delivery networks, and on our old photo system, you could delete the photo and it still lurked in the content delivery network for far too long. And so we've been moving all our photos to a new system where we can give that kind of guarantee. Again, it's one of those instances where when they first built it, they weren't thinking very much about the need to do all of this. And the newer versions of all of our systems are much, much better at doing this. So your photo should go, it'll be invisible straight away. Somebody who had the original hyperlink might, with the technical knowledge, be able to find it in a caching system for some days after. But certainly after 45 days and certainly after 10 years, we will not have it on our servers and the content delivery network will not have it on their servers.
Great. One quick last question in the blue square.
I'll keep it to a brief question, and I have a rather broad question for you about responsibility and the architecture of the system at Facebook, which I'd like to preface with a short example. Now, a week ago today in Canada, they shelved a bill called C30, which was called the Stop Internet Predators Act, which essentially allowed the police in Canada to monitor anyone's IP address, not just their numbers, their address, but also they could go through the internet and they could force telecom providers to give them the names of people in the internet, not just the names themselves, but the people associated with, say, another IP address. So you have someone who's being questioned, you can find out the names of his associates. And this is all done without a warrant. So this was put on the table by our public safety minister, and within, I think, 3 days, both right and left, in the press, hundreds of thousands of Canadians, and in fact even in the internet hacker group Anonymous, had gone after him quite publicly based on the statement he made, which is that you're either with me or you're with the child pornographers. Now, it seemed to me that he drew a very clear distinction between what it meant to represent privacy in Canada for about 38 million of us there, and what it meant to stand with on the other side of the law. Now, the architecture of that system has been challenged, the bill has been shelved, and he's now under review, and he's in fact under threats from Anonymous for making a statement such as this. And I don't mean to ally Facebook with something so reprehensible as a statement like that. But when you look at, for instance, timeline, which was not optional, and it was the design and architecture of a system which inscribed, say, an idea of time and of forgetting and of a relationship between people in a social space, just like a legal space, the choice was not up to us, I think, and I'm not quite sure how Facebook does have sort of a give and take with the public and is able to assess how we feel, how we stand about privacy. But what struck me as odd about Timeline was that I was not able to say no. I couldn't say I disagree. I don't think that for instance, as we heard up here, see friendship, which I think is kind of an ultimate irony because nothing like that falls into a discrete contextual package. I can't look back in time and say how I behaved and how I interacted is a representative of me. I've changed. I couldn't say I disagree with this model. And I do understand, to finish, that Facebook is trying to become a social utility. It's trying to make things easier for all of us. And there follows, I think, an admirable set of ideals. But as you round the square, are you aware that you're creating a different environment? And what steps do you take to address it?
Richard, could you hold that? Because I think we should try and wrap it up, and perhaps we can build that into any concluding remarks you want to make. And I think I wanted to go to perhaps Victor first and then to come back to you to have the last word. And just to broaden the question, I mean, it seems to be more broadly stated, the challenge is, can and should such a superpower try and have a set of, so to speak, normative standards or normative assumptions that can apply to, 1/6 of humankind? Isn't that in itself a hubristic and problematic undertaking? So perhaps I could add that very small question on to the last one. Victor, would you like to?
I think I'll donate my time to
Richard.
You're too kind.
He yields the balance of his time.
We are. I think the way we see ourselves is in a highly competitive environment, not just sitting here today, but thinking of the broad span of internet services and the last, whatever it is, 20 years of development of those services. And we see ourselves as clearly that we've been successful. And we see that success as being contingent on the fact that we can look ahead and see what people will want next year. And so we tend to make changes at a rate which is uncomfortable quite often for the people using the service until we get to next year. And we have joked inside the company of, let's switch back to the Facebook 4 versions ago and listen to the squeals of protest as people say how awful it is, but that was the version that they were fighting to say. It's slightly jokey, but genuinely at the heart of the company is that notion that if you don't, stay at the cutting edge, sometimes the bleeding edge, in our environment, then you're no longer going to be successful in terms of engaging people on the service.
In doing that, I think it's really important that we do have some core principles, and some of those we've had, almost by definition, had to evolve as we go. And I think there is a question that is sincerely asked of us and to which we need to respond, which is to say, have we arrived at a point where those values are sufficiently well understood that people can trust us? I will inevitably say that the glass is half full, but I've been in the company 2.5 years, which is longer than 80% of the employees, and what I've seen is the right direction of travel. And I would say that actually timeline is quite an important expression of that. If there is a value, the value is what we would call user control, that the individual kind of controls that environment. And a lot of what we do is about that. If I have an issue with somebody else's content, we've put in place this feature called social reporting. So rather than us all escalating off to some other authority the fact you don't like a photo, report it to the person who posted the photo. I should be controlling my environment. Most of the disputes on the site can be resolved by people blocking each other or using the tools to control that environment. Not all of them, and sometimes they need to escalate to us. The content on the site and how you present it, again, is for you to determine. And timeline, I actually think, is an expression of that. As I say, that content was all there before. It was all findable. The enterprising Daily Mail researcher who'd wanted to investigate me could have found it, but I probably wasn't aware of it because it was invisible to me. It was visible to the person who scrolled down 20 pages and found it. So I think it's consistent with the idea of user control that we are now giving you in one place a simple way to see and exercise a certain degree of control over, you can't edit the historic post, but there's a lot of other control, including deleting everything. You can see and control everything in one place. So I think that evolution is consistent with that philosophy. But I think that's the test, and that if people feel out of control on our service, we'll lose their engagement. If people feel in control, even if they're uncomfortable about a particular design decision or a way we've gone, but fundamentally they feel they're the boss and we're the slave in this relationship, then they'll feel good. And maybe that's the measure we need to have as a company success factor, the boss slave indicator. And as long as we're at the slave end of it, we'll be successful. If people start feeling we're shifting into the boss end of it and dictating, and this is the challenge, we want to be ahead of them, but we don't want to be dictating to them what they have to have, then we'll not be successful. It's probably the best way I can summarize.
Thank you very much, Richard. I want to thank Victor Mayer-Schonberger for being a wonderful challenger, exactly what we wanted, and I particularly want to thank Richard Allen for taking a very challenging set of questions, and I think answering them extremely frankly and articulately. And this evening was unforgettable and will never be forgotten because it will be recorded forevermore on our website and the University iTunes. Thank you both very much.